Okay, so I wanted to just ramble real quick. Right off the top, this is going to be sight reading related. So if you care, that's cool. It's going to be more podcast style because I'm just going to ramble. No, I have no script and I have no. There's not going to be any visual aids here. So other than my hands that I talk with, so click away if you don't care. Other than that, yeah, my gig schedule has just been ludicrous lately. And so, as much as I want to put together much more well-produced videos with more visual aids and better instructive material, um, it's really difficult right now. And so, the problem is I still have all these ideas on my mind constantly that I want to talk about because I'm very passionate about all these pedagogical issues and how to practice better. So I'm just going to do that. I'm just going to ramble a little bit. And so many topics that I've wanted to talk about lately. And I think I'm just going to have to start doing it in this format where I just ramble a little bit. And some people are going to like it, and that's cool. So there was a thread on Reddit, sight reading related, and that's what we're going to talk about. And basically, I always kind of hint that I want to make a video at some point about the top 10 worst pieces of sight reading advice that I frequently hear. And somebody basically had recommended 2 of them. And, at some point I will compile that into a nice script and put it together. But here's 2 of them that are very important and they're kind of related. And I might as well just talk about them and ramble. So, basically the 2 things that he had recommended were to sight read with a metronome and to just keep going. And that's the just keep going part is one of those that really irritates me. And it's the most prevalent thing. And I think for the most part, one of the biggest reasons that some people say that is that as an accompanist, you have to just keep going. And I do all the time. I do have to just keep going. It's not how I practice, but in a performance situation or a rehearsal situation, I have to just keep going. Just because that's how you do it in performance does not mean that's how you practice it. And then on the other side, which is where I actually think this guy was coming from, he was coming from the side of, oh, well, you're not trying to sight read, to play something well necessarily. You're just trying to get a feel for it. So you just want to get an idea of how it goes. So just drop notes and just keep going. Sure, I guess, if that's your goal. The problem there is that most people who are having trouble sight reading, especially the guy who started the thread, who's working out of the Hannah Smith book, which will tell you about where he's at level-wise, that's not helpful for him. If he's struggling halfway through the Hannah Smith book, he's not just going to pick up whatever collection of, Bach or Mozart or Beethoven sonatas and I'm just going to keep going and just drop notes and just get a feel for it. No, he won't be able to do any of that at all. So when you practice, you need to be aware of what you're doing. And the way I always relate this to, just always think of music like language. At any point, if you're having an issue, think of music like language, relate it to that, and it'll make so much more sense what you should or should not do in a lot of pedagogical situations. So thinking of it like language, we don't tell kids, okay, we're going to turn on a metronome and you have to say 1 syllable, per click and just keep going. You would never say that to kids. That is just the most idiotic thing ever. What do we say to kids when they're trying to read? You say, slow down, sound it out. And also we tell them, look up words if you don't know the word. So let's relate that back to music. It's the same thing. If you are playing along and you run in, you want to keep a nice pace, but if you run into a passage that's suddenly very difficult, slow down and sound it out. Literally think through what is the process that needs to happen. First, digest all the notes that need to happen. What notes are about to happen? Where are my hands now? Where do they need to go? What fingers need to go there? Which voices in each hand are changing? If there's multiple voices, you might have to think about a lot of moving parts. And then go. And it's a multi-step process, but you eventually get faster at it to the point that you don't think about it at all. I don't think about it almost at all at this point. For things that are in my wheelhouse, I absolutely do for things that aren't. But that's kind of how that works. It's just like language. You do need to sound it out. So I would say sight read at a variable tempo. You will start to figure out what your tempo what kind of tempo you can go at consistently. Part of this is, you're sort of auto-regulating your tempo. If you're reading kind of at a variable tempo, you start to get to a point where you're like, okay, this piece is mostly quarter notes and there are a handful of eighth notes. There aren't any huge jumps, so I can probably play it at about this tempo. And you'll start sight reading it at about the tempo that you can stay on top of it. You're not going to start like that, but you'll get to where you can look at a piece of music and you can kind of get a rough idea. And if, you're going along and then suddenly you turn the page and there's a bunch of 16th notes, okay, fine. Slow it down. You might slow down to half the tempo because that's what you need to do. And you just read as slowly as you need to accurately play through all those things. If you're having to slow down way too much, then you're probably sight reading something that's a little dense for you. But ultimately, yes, stay away from the metronome and don't just keep going. Don't just play over your mistakes. I guess there is a place for that. I mean, obviously in my career, there's a place for it. And I guess for people who are very focused on preparing repertoire and they I want to find the next piece of repertoire. So I'm just going to go open a Beethoven sonata book and I'm just going to sight read a bunch of Beethoven sonatas until I pick one that I like. Sure. I mean, if that's a thing that you can easily do and you actually give a shit about blindly picking a Beethoven sonata because you played through it, go for it. Now, I would say that most of the time, people who are doing that, they're probably not picking something because they're like, I like the way that sounds. They're usually picking it, total tangent here, they're probably picking it because, this is easy for me because it's already in my wheelhouse. And I always talk about how people tend to do that. A lot, especially in classical piano, what you'll find is there are people who are really good at Chopin or really good at Bach, and they're usually not good at the other one because once they get really good at one, they just kind of stick to that. And they like it because it's easy to them. It's much the same way that if somebody is good at music by reading, they tend to not want to work on learning to play by ear, and vice versa. If they're good at playing by ear, they don't tend to learn to read very well. So, yeah, a lot of people are just going to gravitate towards what's already comfortable, and that's developmentally, that's sort of a dead end. People get to a point where they're kind of comfortable with their skills, and then they just kind of plateau because they keep just doing the thing that they're already good at, and they're not expanding their horizons. But no, if I wanted to pick a piece of repertoire personally, I mean, that's not a thing I'd do. I've got enough work music. I'd listen. That's usually how I'm picking music. Well, that sounds cool. I want to play that or whatever, And then at least you're not running into that thing where you're only picking music that's easy for you. See, it's a crazy tangent. If I don't have a script, it's going to go all over the place. But yeah, stay away from stay away from just keeping on going and using a metronome. And I guess on a related note, a thing that people don't think about is how, on a language-related thing, how difficult piano technique is. And that's a thing that those people are taking for granted. If they're a person who can just grab, a collection of Mozart sonatas or something off the shelf and just sight read it, they probably aren't thinking about all of that technical stuff. And I'll analogize it once again back to language. When you speak, if I said a word in a foreign language that you totally didn't know, you could probably say that back, and you wouldn't think about it. But what's happening is there's a lot of mechanisms going on with your lips and your teeth and your tongue and the amount of air pressure and little things to get pitch inflection and things like that. There's a lot happening, and you don't think about the mechanics of it at all. But when you're playing piano, your hands are the mechanics. Your hands are the same thing that to piano that your mouth is when you're speaking. And we don't have to think about it when we're speaking, but man, so we have to develop this whole mechanism with our hands to translate, even if we can read music on the page, we have to be able to translate that into our hands. So you have to develop all of this technique. And a lot of those people who give that kind of advice about just keeping on going, they have it. They have the technique. They've developed it over years or decades, and they just don't think about it. They forget that it's hard. It's really similar to the way that native English speakers often think that English is an easy language to learn. They're like, oh, why doesn't everybody just learn to speak English really, really well? Like, it's so easy. Yeah, it's easy to you because you learned it when you were really young and you didn't think about how ridiculously inconsistent pronunciation is in English and how weird all of our homophones and homonyms are. Holy crap, there's so much weirdness going on there. And then just weird turns of phrase that if you transliterate them to another language, they literally make no sense. You only understand them, like you don't even understand the etymology of a given phrase. Something like, the proof is in the pudding. What the fuck does that mean? You know what it means, but do you know what it means? Like, what would that mean if you translated it transliterally to another language? It doesn't make any goddamn sense. That's the thing, because and the actual saying is the proof of the pudding is in the tasting. You might not even know that, and you don't need to know that to understand from just a cultural context what the phrase means. But that doesn't translate very well. So that's a problem where people take for granted skills that they already have that they developed when they're really young. So this is a big part of why people give this really bad sight reading advice. And I got so much of it for so long, but luckily I was already a very trained musician who was coming into piano as a secondary instrument. And so that kind of gave me a really different perspective. I know what it's like to be able to sight read really well. On trumpet, like tons of gigs where I literally am just sight reading during the performance because that's what's expected. And everybody around me was always a good sight reader because at a high level, everybody around you is just expected to sight read in ensembles, strings or winds. But in the piano world, that's not a thing. And it's probably, it's harder. Piano's way harder to sight read. But, at least I went in realizing, oh, I'm coming into this new instrument that has all this new technique that I don't have. I have to develop that. And I have to develop a new set of sight reading skills to coordinate all of this technique. And luckily I'm aware of that because I wasn't an adult beginner in music, but I was basically an adult beginner in piano. But coming from a very musically experienced background. But man, people are missing that. Piano culture is so weird with it. And also people tend to think that you're either a reader or you're not. Like even among classical musicians, there's the argument that you're a memorizer or you're a reader, and it can't be the other. That's bullshit. Like teachers let their students gravitate towards one or the other. And if your student is a good memorizer, maybe you need to focus on their reading. What they're good at is basically their crutch. Don't let them get away with that. I'm trying not to be snarky and name names, but a very large classical piano YouTuber mentioned an anecdote about a student of his who had read all the way through something, or had performed all the way through something in a lesson, got to the very end, and then asked to start at the very beginning because he made a mistake right near the end because he couldn't start anywhere else. Once the train was derailed, he didn't know where to start. And, he's a good memorizer, and he's just naturally a good memorizer. Bullshit, you didn't teach him to read well. If he's bad at the reading, focus on his reading so that he's not memorizing in his hands. The reason he can't start anywhere else is because he memorized it 100% in his hands, procedural memory for the entire piece, and he couldn't pull up a single bar in his brain to know, oh, what are some good starting points? And really good classical pianist, including this guy's channel. The guy who runs the channel, obviously a fantastic classical musician who has performed by memory. But you know what? 100%. If he's performing by memory, I could give him manuscript paper and he could write that piano solo verbatim because he hasn't memorized on a much deeper level. But if he's not realizing that with his student who obviously is not internalizing the reading, that's a problem. So yeah, don't buy into that idea that you're one or the other. You can be both. And honestly, you'll be a better memorizer if you're a better sight reader. I think one of the older videos that I made was talking about that. Your reading does not make your memorization worse. The skills that make you a good sight reader will make your memorization much better, and it will make you not rely on procedural memory. You'll actually be able to essentially visualize the score, assuming you don't have aphantasia. I'm sure they have some way of working around that. But anyway, this has gotten off the rails. See, this is why I need scripts. But anyway, I'm just gonna let this go like this, and let me know what you think. Hopefully, this was helpful.